Welcome back, everyone, to our deep dive into Azure Fundamentals. We're tackling Episode 3 today, and get ready because we're going in depth on the shared responsibility model. This one is so important for anyone using cloud services, and especially for Azure.
That's right. Shared responsibility is absolutely crucial to wrap your head around in the cloud world.
You provided some great info on this, so let's unpack it together and really understand what it means for you, the listener, in terms of security and day-to-day operations when you move to the cloud. It can feel like a bit of a jungle out there, right?
Totally. It can be confusing at first.
That's why I think of this deep dive as a sort of roadmap, helping you navigate who does what when you're working with Azure. We're going to break down exactly what the cloud provider takes care of and what you, the consumer, are responsible for. And maybe we can even highlight some of those tricky spots where things can get a little blurry. Ready to jump in?
Sounds good.
Let's start with the classic scenario, the way IT used to be done. The good old corporate data center. Where everything was on premises. Your materials really emphasized how, in that world, the business was basically on the hook for absolutely everything.
Absolutely. It was a totally different ballgame.
So let's paint a picture for our listeners. When we talk about being responsible for everything in those traditional data centers, what exactly were companies dealing with back then? What did that look like on the ground?
Well, first off, you had the physical security of the whole building to think about. We're talking controlling access, like who gets in and out, right? And then setting up all those surveillance systems. Those physical safeguards were all your responsibility.
Oh, and don't forget the infrastructure itself, the backbone of it all.
Oh, right. Of course. You needed to worry about the power supply. Had to make sure that was super reliable. And the cooling systems, especially with all those servers generating heat, can't have them overheating. And then the networking, connecting everything up, a huge job. And guess what? If any of that went down, it was up to you to get things back online.
And that's not even touching the hardware, the servers themselves, right?
Oh, yeah. That was a whole other world of responsibility. You had to buy all those servers, the storage arrays, and all the network equipment. And then, of course, came the ongoing maintenance. That stuff needs constant care. And eventually, you knew those servers were going to become obsolete. You'd have to replace them with newer models, and that wasn't cheap.
So I'm hearing that from the actual physical security guards at the front door to upgrading a stick of RAM in a server, it was all on the company's shoulders.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly demanding in terms of both time and money.
You got it. It was a massive undertaking and, let's be honest, incredibly costly. You were looking at significant capital investment up front and then ongoing operational expenses that never seemed to end. Now, fast forward to the cloud era, and this whole landscape starts to transform, and that's where the shared responsibility model comes into play. It changes how these responsibilities are divided up.
And that's the heart of what we're talking about today. So let's shift gears and focus on the cloud provider's role in this new world. Let's take Azure, for example. What are some of those foundational things that they take off your plate?
Okay, so think of it this way. The cloud provider, in this case Azure, steps up and handles that core infrastructure. They become responsible for it. That includes things like the physical security of their data centers, which are often fortresses. Seriously.
I've seen pictures. They're impressive.
They are. Multi-layered security, high-tech surveillance, and they have to meet all sorts of strict compliance standards. It's a whole other level.
So we can rest assured that the physical stuff is handled. What else is on their list?
Well, then there are the utilities, the essentials. They guarantee reliable power, keep those cooling systems humming efficiently, and make sure the network connectivity is rock solid. So your cloud services stay up and running smoothly. And here's the big one. They manage all those physical servers and storage devices. That's the actual hardware everything runs on, and it's all on them.
So it sounds like with Azure, we're essentially tapping into their expertise, their huge investment in these fundamental areas. What does this shift mean for the average cloud user, someone working with Azure? What changes for them?
Here's where it gets interesting. With the cloud, you're no longer in the server room, literally. You give up direct physical access and control over the underlying infrastructure. That's a big change in how IT is handled. You have to trust that the provider is maintaining that physical environment to a high standard, and that allows you to focus your energy and resources elsewhere.
That's a crucial point. It's like outsourcing those core responsibilities, right?
Exactly. But here's the catch, and this is something your materials really stressed. Sharing responsibility doesn't mean you're off the hook completely. The cloud user still has a significant role to play, and it's important to understand what those responsibilities are.
Right. It's a shared model, not a we do everything model.
Exactly.
So let's break it down for our listeners. In this cloud world, What falls under the user's side of the responsibility equation? What do they absolutely need to stay on top of?
One of the biggest things is protecting your data. That remains absolutely critical, even in the cloud. It's your data, and you need to make sure it's safe and secure.
So even though it's stored on Azure's infrastructure, it's still my responsibility to protect it.
Precisely. You need to implement strong encryption, have a solid backup and recovery plan, and think about things like where your data is physically located and if it meets any compliance requirements.
That makes perfect sense. So data protection is number one. What else do cloud users need to focus on?
Another critical area is managing user access and identities. This means controlling who can access your cloud resources, putting strong authentication measures in place, like multi-factor authentication, and following the principle of least privilege.
Okay, break that down a little. What's least privilege?
It basically means you only give users the bare minimum permissions they need to do their jobs. Don't give anyone more access than they absolutely require.
Makes sense. Limit the potential damage if someone's account gets compromised.
Exactly. And here's another thing, and it's often overlooked. You're also responsible for the security of all the devices connecting to the cloud. That means laptops, smartphones, tablets, IoT devices, anything accessing your Azure environment.
Because if any of those endpoints are compromised, it's a weak link. Right.
Exactly. It becomes a backdoor into your cloud resources, even with Azure's top-notch physical security.
So let me get this straight. Even if Azure's data centers are like Fort Knox, if one of my team members uses a weak password and their laptop gets hacked, that's still on me.
You got it. You are responsible for your data and who has access to it. And here's where things get a little trickier. The shared responsibility isn't exactly the same across all the different cloud services. It actually changes depending on the service model you choose.
Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. How do those different cloud service models affect this division of responsibility? Can you walk us through it?
Of course. Let's take a managed cloud SQL database as an example. This falls under what's known as Platform as a Service, or PaaS. Here, Azure manages the operating system the database runs on and the database software itself. They even handle all the patching and updates, so that's a lot less for you to worry about.
So Azure's taking care of the platform the database sits on, but what am I still on the hook for?
You're still in charge of the data within that database. That includes its security configuration, making sure it meets any compliance rules, and managing who can access it.
Okay, so I'm not managing the database software itself, but the data structure, the content, and access control are still my domain.
Exactly. Now let's look at a different scenario. Deploying your own database on a virtual machine in Azure. This falls under Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS. Here, your responsibilities are much broader. You're not just managing the data, you're also managing the operating system of that virtual machine, making sure the database software is patched and updated, setting up its specific security configurations, and ensuring backups and high availability.
So the more I want to customize and control at the infrastructure level, the more I take on. It's a trade-off.
That's a key principle to grasp with the shared responsibility model. More control equals more responsibility. Now let's dig a little deeper into IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS to really get the full picture.
Sounds good. Let's break them down one by one.
Okay, starting with Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS. This is like renting the basic building blocks of computing: virtual machines, storage, and networks. You get maximum control over these resources, but that also means you're responsible for setting up the operating systems, any applications you install, and the network configuration. The provider, in this case, Azure, just handles the physical infrastructure those resources run on.
So IaaS is the DIY approach. Maximum flexibility, but also maximum responsibility.
Precisely. Now, moving on to Platform as a Service, or PaaS, this is kind of a middle ground. Azure manages the underlying infrastructure and provides you with a ready-made environment to run your applications. They take care of operating systems, middleware, and often even give you development tools. This lets you focus on building, deploying, and managing your applications. Your main responsibility is securing your application code and the data it handles.
So PaaS streamlines things, lets me focus more on the application itself.
Exactly. It takes away a lot of that infrastructure headache. And finally, we have Software as a Service, or SaaS. Think of applications like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce. Here, Azure handles almost everything. They're responsible for the application's security, maintenance, updates, the infrastructure, the whole 9 yards. Your main job as a consumer is managing user access to the service and handling the data you put into the application.
So SaaS is like the all-inclusive resort of the cloud world.
Haha, That's a great way to put it. You just focus on using the application and the provider handles all the behind-the-scenes stuff. Now, here's something important to remember, and this was highlighted in your materials. No matter which service model you choose, there are certain responsibilities that always stay with you, the cloud user. These are non-negotiable.
Okay, let's spell those out for everyone listening. What are those core responsibilities that I need to be aware of, no matter what kind of cloud service I'm using?
First and foremost, your data. No matter where it lives, you are ultimately responsible for its security, its integrity, and how it's managed. That's your domain. Second, you are responsible for the security of all the devices connecting to your cloud services. That includes laptops, smartphones, everything.
So data security and device security. Got it. What else?
And third, you're responsible for managing user access and identities. You need to control who can access your cloud resources and make sure it's only authorized individuals. That means strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, the whole shebang.
So data, devices, and identities. Those are my three big responsibilities. Now, flip the coin. What about the cloud provider, Azure in this case? What are their constant responsibilities, the things they always handle?
They're always responsible for the physical security of those data center facilities. Remember, those are like fortresses with all the security measures in place. They also handle the physical network infrastructure that connects everything together, and they maintain those physical servers and storage devices that power their cloud services. They own that foundational hardware layer.
Okay, they handle the core infrastructure, the physical side of things.
Mhm.
That makes sense. Now, your materials also talked about some responsibilities that change depending on whether you're using IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS. Can we quickly run through some of those variable responsibilities?
Absolutely. Managing the operating system is a big one. With IaaS, that's your job. But with PaaS and SaaS, Azure takes care of it. Setting up network controls is mostly on you in IaaS, becomes a shared responsibility in PaaS, and is managed by Azure and SaaS. And then there's managing your applications. That's your responsibility in IaaS and PaaS, but with SaaS, Azure manages the application for you.
So the division of labor shifts depending on the service model.
Exactly. And here's one that's super important but can be tricky: securing identities and the overall infrastructure. This one can vary a lot depending on the service model you're using and how you've configured your environment. It's an area where you need to pay close attention and understand exactly what you're responsible for.
So for everyone listening, why is understanding this shared responsibility model so critical? Why should they care?
It's not just some abstract concept, it has real-world implications. First, it directly impacts your security posture. If you don't know what you're responsible for, you can't protect those areas effectively, and that leaves you vulnerable. Second, it's crucial for compliance. Many regulations require you to clearly define who is responsible for what security controls.
So it's not just about security, it's about being compliant with regulations.
Exactly. And finally, it impacts your operational efficiency. Knowing who does what helps you allocate your resources effectively, avoid duplicating effort, and most importantly, prevent overlooking those essential security and management tasks.
So to sum it all up, the shared responsibility model is about understanding how the workload is divided in the cloud. Azure provides a powerful and scalable foundation, but you, the user, maintain control and responsibility for your data, who can access it, and how you interact with the cloud. The exact balance of this responsibility shifts depending on whether you're using IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS. Thinking about your own situation, it's worth taking a moment to assess which areas of your cloud responsibilities might need a closer look.
I completely agree. It's all about staying informed and proactive in managing your side of the shared responsibility equation.
Great advice. And on that note, we're going to wrap things up for today. Remember, folks, you can find more great resources on Azure Fundamentals, including a free AZ900 exam prep course and a bunch of helpful books over at our website, www.learnazureforfree.com. And be sure to tune in next time when we'll be diving into two fascinating topics: cloud models and the consumption-based model. Until then, happy learning.